Shalom, shalom. Call Halayimla, Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Rakak Kodash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, better known as GMS, who rule well. Peace and salutations unto the hopeful elect, the tabernacle of David, beginning with the 144,000, and the rest of the men, women, and children, whom Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai will have mercy upon out of the 12 tribes of Israel. And this is your brother Matazabath, back again as a continuation on, following up in this series, the book of Revelation. And this is going to be Revelation, the 9th chapter breakdown. Okay, so as we get into this lesson, what you will notice within this chapter is that there are a lot of metaphors and allegories. And so as we begin this chapter, all right, we're picking up from Revelation, the 8th chapter, which, if you remember in the previous lesson, all right, the very last verse, Revelation chapter 8, verse 10 and verse 13, Salakia, which says, "And I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the three angels which are yet to sound." And what this is going into, when you look up the word woe, and simply just means destruction, but also it means lamenting or mourning. All right. And this reminds me of the precept in Ezekiel, the 7th chapter, when it was told to Ezekiel, chapter 2 and verse 10, it says, "And he spread it before me," speaking of the book, which is the overall Bible itself, "and it was written within and without, and there was written therein lamentations and mourning and woe." And this is why we always tell, you brethren that are in the truth, all right, that knowing that you are a Hebrew Israelite is only a third of the battle, man. All right, because although it's exciting, although we are considered the promised nation, all right, in terms of Abraham getting the promise and the kingdom is going to be given to us, but there's a lot of things that we must go through considering walking through the straight gate, all right, and the times of trialing and testing, okay, are at hand when it comes to Jacob's trouble. So with that being said, let's turn our attentions back to Revelation, the 9th chapter, all right, and as you see here, the 5th trumpet, the bottomless pit. All right, so let's start at the top. Revelation chapter 9 and verse 1. "And the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key to the bottomless pit." All right, now the 5th angel, okay, represents the first of the last three woes, as we read in Revelation chapter 8 and verse 13. Okay, and the first of these woes, all right, as we're going to get further into it, as we continue to read down, represents World War I. And so, as it says about to give him, or Salakia, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. The bottomless pit represents Europe. And how do we know that? Because number one, Europe, all right, has a lack of natural resources, all right? And when you deal with the beast, originally being of the Roman Empire, but now today represents NATO, the EU, and the US, which is Babylon and Great America, i.e. known as the Neo-Roman Empire, all right, essentially came out of Europe, which further proves that the bottomless pit is referring to Europe. Now, also the scriptures tells you that a pit, represents land. And if we get a precept, let's go to 2nd Esdras chapter 5, verses 23 and 24, which says, "And said, O Lord, that bearest rule of every wood of the earth, and of all the trees thereof, thou hast chosen thee one only vine." And that vine represents the nation of Israel. All right, you can also get that in Jeremiah, I believe, the 2nd chapter, verse 24. "And of all lands of the whole world, thou hast chosen thee one pit," you see, "and of all the flowers thereof, one lily." All right, and that land, or that one pit, represents Jerusalem. All right. So that's a precept to prove that when it speaks about the bottomless pit in Revelation, the 9th chapter, it's referencing a particular land, which in this case is talking about Europe. All right. So let's go back to Revelation chapter 9. All right. Leaving off from verse 1, we're going to go into verse 2, and it reads, "And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, and as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit." All right. And this is referring to, once again, World War I. Now, throughout this lesson, all right, I'm going to be showcasing pictures so that you can get a visual aspect. And so the first picture that I have here is an indication taken from an aerial view during World War I. All right. And so this is an example of the vision that John the Revelator saw. All right. Pertaining to that first woe, the vision that he was given. All right. The smoke. All right. Coming up from the bottomless pit. All right. And so it makes it easier if you can visualize, all right, what's actually being said, to put all the pieces together. Right. So let's read that again. Verse 2. "And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit." All right. And that's an example of what it's actually referring to. Right. So it says, verse 3, "And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power as the scorpions of the earth have power." Now, this is metaphorically speaking of during World War I. This is referencing of the fighter planes during that time. And so what you have to take into account when John the Revelator was writing the vision, obviously he wasn't going to write down that it was an airplane, because there was no such technology back then, 2,500 plus years ago. So John the Revelator had to explain it in a way that it best understood to him. So he described these fighter jets as locusts within the air. Okay. Now, when it says, and unto them, meaning these fighter jets that John the Revelator saw, but related to them as locusts, was given power as scorpions on the earth have power. And this is referencing their tail guns. All right. So to give you an example of what John the Revelator saw, all right, there's an image. Now, this is one image that I found. And as you can see in the background, all of these, different planes found in the background from a distance, all right, they easily will look like locusts. All right. Let's get another picture, which I have here. All right. So amidst the flying in the sky, imagine seeing a group of these planes together. All right. And to the, naked eye, all right, or from a far distance, I should say, they can easily pass as looking like, a bunch of locusts. Right. Now, when it talks about it was given power unto them, all right, like of a scorpion, this is what it was referencing. All right, because during that time, they had what is called a rear gun. All right. And they were shooting the guns from the back of the plane, or actually inside the cockpit. All right. As you can see here, this is just a representation of what John the Revelator saw. All right. So going back, let's read that again. Revelation 9 and verse 3. "And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power as the scorpions of the earth had power." All right. Once again, this is referring to the World War I fighter jets and the tail guns that they had back then. Verse 4. "And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of the Most High in their foreheads." Right. Because ultimately, John the Revelator, he saw that, okay, these locusts are not eating the grass or anything. All right. So this proves that it wasn't speaking about actual locusts, but it was speaking about those World War I planes. And basically those planes, they were killing men who were not sealed. All right. They were not of the elect, because back then, around that time, between 1914 and 1918, during the time of World War I, you had elect men, okay, that have been exempted from judgment. They weren't killed. Now you may ask, well, why was that? Because those men, okay, they were sealed from the Heavenly Father, because through their seed line, they would have had to produce sons, okay, up until this point in time at 2024, who are deemed the elect. And the Lord, he can work out things like that, to produce offspring, to produce seed. All right. Your son, your son's son, your son's son's son, up until this point in time. All right. For that son to be found written in the book of life. That's why it says, but only those men which have not the seal of the Most High in their foreheads. And you can liken this seal back to the precept in Ezekiel, the 9th chapter, where it talks about that mark. OK, so going on, verse 5, Salakia, it says, and to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they shall be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. Now, this is going into when it says they should be tormented 5 months. Ultimately, this is speaking of it. The war took place about 5 years. All right, because I believe it was declared somewhere around July, maybe the 27th or the 28th of July, around 1914. And you had something that was called armistice, which, if I go here, let's just look this up real quick. So you had something that was called armistice, all right, for World War I, all right, which it says here at the top, the armistice was the ceasefire that ended hostilities between the Allies and Germany on 11th of November, 1918. The armistice did not end the First World War itself, but it was the agreement which stopped the fighting on the Western Front while the terms of the permanent peace were discussed, right? Because if you look up, let's see here, if you actually look up how many years did World War I last, right? Now, they'll tell you 4 years, right? But see, the scripture says 5 months, which that's equivalent to 5 years. Okay, so where do the 5th year comes in? You may ask. Well, you had something that was called the Treaty of Versailles, okay, which was signed. It was a peace treaty signed on June 28th, 1919. Okay, and so this is when they, wanted the ceasefire. So from the time of 1914 all the way up until 1919, that's a total of 5 years. And that's the reason why we read, if we go back, the armistice, which clearly tells you that the ceasefire that ended, although it may have ended, it did not end the First World War itself. So technically speaking, all right, it didn't last for 4 years, but in actuality, it lasted for 5 years. So going back to Revelation 9, all right, at verse 5, let's read it again. And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. And that torment of a scorpion is referring to the tail gun, all right, because the fighter jets, they were shooting, all right, from the back of the planes, all right. So moving on, all right, this is Revelation 9:6. It says, and in those days, all right, shall men seek death and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from thee. Okay, and this is going into, back then, you have to remember, around that time period, all right, there was no such thing as penicillin, no pain, killers such as what we have today, morphine, all right, and all of that sort of stuff. So a lot of these guys that were wounded during the First World War, all right, they suffered in agony and pain, so much so that they rather just be put to death. All right. They rather just be put to death. Now, I have a small article here from 1914 to 1918 International Encyclopedia of the First World War. And it's entitled Mutilation and Disfiguration by Julie Anderson. So let's just read this top paragraph here just to get some context on what it was talking about. It says the First World War created disfigured and mutilated bodies on a grand scale, and never before had the bodies of soldiers been so devastated by a conflict. Developments in established weapons such as cannons and machine guns, and terrifying innovations such as poison gas created a relative army of disfigured and mutilated men. Now, some men lost multiple limbs and sensory organs such as eyes, and no part of the body was safe from the potential of severe and life-changing wounds. Owing to new and advanced medical specialties, surgical techniques, technical innovations, soldiers survived wounds that in previous conflicts might have killed them. Wounds healed, but often bodies were left badly disfigured and mutilated. These men had to manage not only the result of their bodily wounds, but also their emotional trauma and their new role as disabled veterans. For these damaged men, their war was over, but recovery, rehabilitation, and reintegration presented a new set of challenges. All right, so going back, Revelation 9 and 6, let's read it one more time. It says, and in those days shall men seek death and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from thee. Because although whether they had a mutated, they had their leg amputated, Salaki is what I meant to say, amputated, or whether they had to have an arm chopped off, they didn't have the necessary anesthesia back then in terms of the technology like what we had today. And a good when you look at, what's that movie? How many of you guys, and just put it in the comment section if you know what I'm talking about. There was a movie called Men of Honor, right? And there was a scene where Cuba Gooding Jr., when he had the accident after when they was railing in whatever he found in the sea as a Navy diver, and on the ship he sacrificed his life when that cord snapped and it took off his leg. And there was a scene where he went through surgery and they attached it back, but then he had to have it amputated. Now, back then, the reason why I brought up this scene is because back then they had no anesthesia or anything. So what they used to do for soldiers was they used to put like a rubber ball in their mouth, and then they used to give them strong drink, all right, to kind of give them that numbing sensation from the alcohol. And then they would just have to chop off that leg or chop off that arm or hand, whatever, wrist, whatever the case may be. Okay, that's why it says that men shall desire to die, because imagine being in that much pain to where you have to have a leg or something amputated and you don't have the proper anesthesia and, that we have today, so you can just imagine back then, right? So moving on, verse 7, it says, and the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. Now, this is speaking of, when we look up real quick, let's look up, you had something back then that was called World War I, what is it called? Pickle Hobbs helmet. And this is what it meant when John the Revelator saw. He saw crowns of gold. This is what he was referring to. All right. You had something that was called the pickle hub. All right. That the Germans wore. All right. and other soldiers. I believe the Australians had these sort of style of helmets as well. All right, so this is known as the pickle hub, right? And when it talks about on their heads was as it were the crowns of gold, that's what it was referring to, and their faces were as the faces of Salakia men. All right, which ultimately that's talking about the men that operated these planes, right? So verse 8, and they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions. Now, this is going back to these helmets because you had something that was called pickle hub with plums, which is another way of saying feathers. And so this is what it looked. This is why John the Revelator said it looked like a woman's hair, because this is what they had. Now, to show you just an example in this picture, if you look at the guy standing in the middle, all right, look like a chick with the plums on top. All right. So that's what that's going into. OK. So back here, let me read it again. Revelation 9 and 8. All right. Which says, and they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions. All right. So once again, you know the pickle hub, but this time with the plums, which represents the feathers coming out from the top. And the teeth represents the bullets coming out of the machine guns. All right. Because, when you understand how they used to operate the planes back then. Right. So moving on, verse 9. All right. It says, and they had breastplates as it were breastplates of iron. And the sound of their wings was as the sound of the chariots of many horses running to battle. And this is ultimately talking about the sound of those fighter jet planes, all right, back then. Because unlike today with the commercial airline and the stealth planes that we have, like the F-35 and, just to name one or two, basically, and also the Raptor. But basically back then, the planes had those propellers that you had to turn. And they didn't have the sort of muffler system that planes have today. So it was very loud. OK, so imagine being alive around that time and having a swarm of those planes that are that loud flying over your head, man. That's why John likened them unto locusts. All right. So moving on, verse 10, it says, and they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men for 5 months. And once again, that sting represents the bullets coming out of the tail gun, and the 5 months represents the period of that war lasting for over 5 years. As we already went into that, you had the Treaty of Armistice, which that's another way of calling truce for how long that they're going to fight. And then in 1919, it ended with the Treaty of Versailles, right? So moving on, verse 11. It says, and they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon. All right, if I pronounce that right. So basically, this angel of the bottomless pit represents a man by the name of Kaiser Wilhelm II. Now, Kaiser, when you break it down, the name Kaiser actually means emperor, or in Roman times, it actually means Caesar. It's the same thing, right? Now, this is just a little something based off of World War I dealing with Kaiser Wilhelm II. It says historians typically argue that Wilhelm was largely confined to ceremonial duties during the war, and there were innumerable parades to review and honors to award. The man who in peace had believed himself omnipotent became in war a shadow Kaiser, or a shadow emperor, out of sight, neglected, and relegated to the sidelines. Now it says Wilhelm was a friend of Franz Ferdinand, and he was deeply shocked by his assassination on June 28, 1914. So Wilhelm offered to support Austria-Hungary and crushing the Black Hand, the secret organization that had plotted the killing and even sanctioned the use of force by Austria against the perceived source of movement, which was Serbia. This is often called the blank check. And he wanted to remain in Berlin until the crisis was resolved, but his courtiers persuaded him instead to go on his annual cruise of the North Sea of July 6, 1914. So it says Wilhelm made erratic attempts to stay on top of the crisis via telegram, and when the Austro-Hungarian ultimatum was delivered to Serbia, he hurried back to Berlin, and he reached Berlin on the 28th of July, and he basically just wrote a copy to Serbia. Now, when you understand, right, what happened, basically this spilled over into him wanted to take the Serbians out, which led to Russia getting involved, France, Britain, and that sparked World War I when you go further into it. All right, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of background info on this. So let me see here. Yeah, we can read this a little bit. It says more recent British authors state that Wilhelm II really declared ruthlessness and weakness will start the most terrifying war of the world, whose purpose is to destroy Germany, because there can no longer be any doubts. England, France, and Russia have conspired themselves together to fight in an annihilation war against us. All right, and that's what he stated. All right. And like I said, you can read more of this, but I just want to get straight to the point. All right. So when it talks about that king, all right, or that angel, I should say, not king, Salakia, slip of the tongue, that angel in verse 11, that's speaking of Kaiser Wilhelm II. So verse 12 going on, it says, one woe is past, which represents World War I. And behold, there come two woes more hereafter. Now, what you got to understand, while this was being written, all right, once again, woe means destruction, but there have been two major destructions and a third is prophesied. So at this point in the game, when reading this chapter around the 12th verse, all right, what you got to understand at this point of the vision, however, only one world war had been fought. OK, so that's what sometimes you have to be careful, because the scriptures, it jumps from different time periods. OK, so now we're getting to the sixth trumpet. All right. Army from the east. So now this is going to jump from World War I, and it's going to give you the vision of this last and final war, which is World War III. All right. So it says, and the angel, or the sixth angel, sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before the Most High. OK, now to show you that this is representing what's going to happen in our time right now, let's get a precept. Let's go to Revelation chapter 16 and verse 12. It says, and the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. Because ultimately, all right, this is setting up that last and final third world's war that's going to be met in the valley of Jehoshaphat, or Yehoshaphat. And that's why the scripture says, let's get a precept in Joel, the 3rd chapter. All right. Joel 3, and I'll start at the top. It says, for behold, in those days and in that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah, which represents the southern kingdom, and Jerusalem, representing the northern kingdom, right? I will also gather all nations and bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, which is Yehoshaphat, which also ultimately means the valley of decisions, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land. So this is the will of the Heavenly Father. His will is to gather the nations in this region. That's the reason why the Euphrates River, as of right now, is currently being dried up, because it's preparing for that last final war. So going back to Revelation, the 9th chapter, In verse 13, we left off. It says, and the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before the Most High, saying to the sixth angel, which had the trumpet, loose the four angels which are bound in the great river of Euphrates, which, as we read in Revelation, the 16th chapter, okay, the focal point of this third war's war, okay, will be the focus in the so-called Middle East, or in the Levant region, okay, which is the valley of Yehoshaphat, okay, or Jehoshaphat. So it says, verse 15, and the four angels were loosed, which were prepared, okay, for an hour and a day and a month and a year, for to slay the third part of man. Now, before we break this part down, understand something. Going back to verse 14, a lot of people get this mixed up, and they actually think that there are angels over there right now that are mysteriously bound and trapped underground. And that's not what that's talking about. This is where it becomes highly important that you learn how to go into your words. So let's pick out this word bound in the Greek. All right, we're going to show you. All right, now it says here in the outline of biblical usage, to bind, tie, fasten, to bind, fasten with chains, to throw into chains. See, somebody that's see, brother, that's the angels, they bound in chains. It tells you right there. All right, that's not it. Or the correct context, I should say. Now, remember, I stated that this chapter has many metaphors and allegories, right? So metaphorically speaking, part B, it says, Satan is said to bind a woman bent together by means of a demon as his messenger, taking possession of the woman and preventing her from standing upright. Or number two, to bind, put under obligation of the law, duty. And that's the actual correct definition right here. All right. Because when you understand the volume of the book, okay, angels, let's get a quick precept. Let's go to the Apocrypha and let's grab Sirach chapter 39 and verse 28. It says, there be spirits that are created for vengeance, which in their fury lay on sore strokes. In the time of destruction, they pour out their force and appease the wrath of him that made them. And Salakia for the background noise of the dog. Verse 29, it says, fire and hell and famine and death, all these were created for vengeance. It says teeth of wild beasts and scorpions, serpents, and the sword punishing the wicked to destruction. And here's the main point. It says they shall rejoice in his commandment, and they shall be ready upon earth. The key part there in this verse is ready upon earth when need is, and when their time has come, they shall not transgress his word. And so when you understand that, now you can understand why this definition is the one that gives the correct context prior to reading that particular verse. Because these angels, these four angels, they were put under obligation of the law. They had a duty to carry out when the time was, to be presented. Right now, if you want to go further, Strong's definition, just to give you some more edification, it says a primary verb to bind in various applications, literally or figuratively. To bind, be in bonds, knit, tie, wind. It says see also G 1163 and G 1189. So let's pick out more of these words. All right, now if we go, which is Strong's G 1163, okay.
Strong's G 1163, die.
Right. Now, the correct necessary definition to back this up even more, it says at the top, it is necessary, there is need of, it behooves, is right and proper. A, necessity lying in the nature of a case. B, necessity brought on by circumstances or by the conduct of others towards us. C, necessity in reference to what is required to attain some end. Or D, a necessity of law and command, of duty and equity, and that is the correct definition pertaining to the context of the verse, because these angels were given a duty. right? As the scripture says also, if we go back, let's get a precept in Psalms chapter 103 and verse 20, which says, "Bless the Lord Yahweh, ye his angels that excel in strength, that do his commandments, hearkening unto the voice of his word." So that shows you that when you go back to Revelation, the 9th chapter, all right, and particularly the 14th verse, let's read it again, saying to the sixth angel, which had the trumpet, loose the four angels which are bound. Now you understand what it means by bound, meaning those that had a duty, all right, they were to keep that commandment in the great river Euphrates. And it gives it away in the very next verse, verse 15, because it goes on to say, "And the four angels were loosed, which were prepared." This is the part that people always overlooks. It says, which were prepared for an hour. So in one sentence, people believe that they were actually bound because the Lord kept them in chains, all right, in darkness. But here it's telling you that when they were loose, they were prepared. So which one is it? Did he actually have them bound in chains, or did he have them to stay ready for that command? All right, which ultimately their main job, they were prepared for this final hour to wreak havoc. So let's read it again. Revelation 15, it says, "And the four angels were loosed," okay, meaning they were given the command, "which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year for to slay the third part of man." So ultimately, this is going into Esau, Edom, because the Bible speaks about three classifications of men. You have the sons of God, you have the sons of the wicked, which are the other heathen nations. The sons of the God represents the Israelites today. But then you have the sons of the wicked. Okay, that's the third part of man. And the sons of the wicked are Esau, Edom. Okay, so it says, verse 16, "And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000, and I heard a number of them going into the ICBM missiles." Okay, now this is a new time period, okay, which is a future prophecy, which the horsemen in this context represents the ICBM missiles. All right. And where it talks about the 200,000, it represents 200 million warheads. Now, a precept, which I don't think Blue Letter will have it. No, they don't. Now, a precept to this is, let's go from there to Joel, the 2nd chapter. All right. Now, let's start at the top, because John the Revelator saw these missiles as horsemen. All right. And Joel backs it up. This is Joel chapter 2 and verse 1. "Blow ye the trumpet in Zion, and sound an alarm in my holy mountain. And let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of Yahweh cometh, for it is nigh at hand. A day of darkness and of gloominess, a day of clouds and of thick darkness, as the morning spread upon the mountains, a great people and a strong, there have not been ever the like, neither shall be any more after it, even to the years of many generations." Right? Because this is going to be the war to end all wars. This is the last war, man. And after this, there's not going to be any more war anymore. It tells you that in Isaiah, the 2nd chapter. All of the nations are going to, turn all of their swords and stuff into pruning hooks and everything. And it even tells you in Ezekiel, the 39th chapter, I believe, that we're going to destroy all of the weapons when it's all said and done. But moving on, verse 3, "A fire devoureth before them, and behind them a flame burneth." And this is going into the ICBM missile. "The land," which represents America, "is as the Garden of Eden before them." So it's painting the picture, showing you that as these missiles are taken off, before it hits, America is, it's at one. It's like the Garden of Eden. All right. It has its abundance, its glory is glorying itself with its delicacies, all of that in the third, right? But it goes on to say, "And behind them a desolate wilderness," right? Because when the missiles come and they hit their target at Babylon the Great, the scriptures tells you whether it be in Isaiah, whether it be in the book of Jeremiah, okay, that America is going to be left a total desolate wilderness. Picture the movie, The Book of Eli with Denzel Washington, all right, as he was traveling. So it says, yea, and nothing shall escape them. And the appearance of them is as the appearance of horses, and as horsemen, so shall they run. And this is speaking of those ICBM missiles. Okay, now I have a picture just for your, let me see here. I thought I had it. Maybe I don't. All right, let's get this here. If you look up, let's go back here to this tab and let's look up ICBM missiles and rank firing off. Right. Let's see if I can find a good photo. I don't think I said tank. That's why it's Salakia. Let's do this real quick. Bear with me, brothers and sisters. Let me see. So you can get an idea of the vision that Joel saw. Oh, you know what? Matter of fact, hold on. Let's just do multiple ICBM. Or let me just type this in. Let's do multiple missiles shot off. All right, so just so you can get an indication, that might be a good one. Let's see. Okay, we'll just use this one. Oh, you know what? Let me see. Aha, here we go. The water Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. So let's just use this as just a general type of representation. Now you see how the missiles is being shot off. So essentially what Joel was trying to explain, these ICBM missiles, which in this picture, these are just, regular missiles that are being fired off. But when those ICBMs leave the silos, they're going to be in ranking file, just like you see here in this image. And so this is why he likened it unto horsemen, because when you go back then, when you had, different nations come up against one another and they were fighting with horses and swords, they were all in rank and file order. And that's the same thing that's going to happen when these nations hit the button to fire those missiles. When those missiles are fired off at the same time, they're going to be in a rank and file order, so to speak, and they're not going to break their rank. So ultimately, this is what Joel was explaining. This is the vision that he saw, right? So let's go back to it. Verse 4, Joel chapter 2, verse 4, the appearance of them is as the appearance of horses, and as horsemen, so shall they run, which ultimately lines up with Revelation, the 9th chapter, on what John the Revelator saw about those horses being of, 200,000, and that represents the 200 million warheads, right? Verse 5, like the noise of chariots on the tops of mountains shall they leap, like the noise of a flame of fire that devoureth the stubble, as a strong people set in battle array. Before their face the people shall be much pained, all faces shall gather blackness, right? Because at the end of the day, when people see the missile shot off, all right, they're going to be in fear. They're going to be, pale face. They not going to know what to do, right? And verse 7, it says, they shall run like mighty men, speaking of the ICBM missiles, and they shall climb the wall like men of war, and they shall march everyone on his ways, and they shall not break their ranks. You see that? So going back to this picture, when they shot off that in you got to understand this is the Lord's purpose, because his spirit is going to be in these missiles, meaning they're not going to be deterred. All right. There's not going to be no defense system that's going to be able to stop them from coming. All right. That's why it says they're going to break over the walls. So there's not going to be no type of defense system that's going to be able to stop these missiles from targeting Babylon the Great, which is indeed America. OK, so let's get ready to finish this out. Verse 9, it says, they shall run to and fro in the city. They shall run up the wall. They shall climb up upon the houses. They shall enter in at the windows like a thief. And this is speaking about the blast. All right. When that blast hits, that radiation, how the blast goes through all the neighborhoods and stuff, knocks out the buildings, blasts the windows and stuff like that. That's what it means. All right. So going back, Revelation 9. All right. And we almost there, getting there. So we left off at verse 16. It says, and the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000. And I heard the number of them. And once again, that's going into the ICBM missiles. Verse 17. And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire, which ultimately represents their the structure of the missile, and of jacinth and brimstone. And the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. And now, once again, this is a metaphor, because we know that lions don't actually spew out fire from their mouth. So this is talking about the warheads off those ICBM missiles, right? So verse 18, it says, by these three was the third part of man killed, representing Esau, Edom. All right. The sons of the wicked. All right. The third part of men, by the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone which issue out of their mouths. And you can also grab, if you want, let's get the book of Job 20. And I'll start at verse 22. In the fullness of his sufficiency, he shall be in straits. Speaking of Edom, Esau, Edom, and every hand of the wicked shall come upon him, which ultimately that word wicked goes into labor. Verse 23, when he is about to fill his belly, the Most High shall cast the fury of his wrath upon him, and shall rain it upon him while he is eating. And ultimately, this is speaking of him establishing his new world order, because when these devils get everything together and they mandate the RFID CHIP, which is the mark of the beast, they're going to sit down at the table feasting, bringing all of the sheeps to the slaughter, and thinking that they're going to establish this one world government. And while they're going to try to attempt to do that, that's when Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushua is going to step in and continue on reading. It says in verse 24, and he shall flee, meaning Esau is going to flee from what? The iron weapon, and the bow of steel shall strike him through. And what is this talking about? That's talking about those missiles. You see? So he's not going to escape. Verse 25, it says, it is drawn and cometh out of the body, yea, the glittering sword cometh out of his gall, and terrors are upon him. All right, because ultimately that glittering sword goes back to Isaiah, the 34th chapter, which is a sword that's bathed in heaven. All right, and it's going to come down upon Idumea, which is that missile. Isaiah chapter 34 and verse 5, for my sword shall be bathed in heaven, and behold, it shall come down upon Idumea, which Idumea is the Greek way of saying the word Edom. And it says, and upon the people of my curse to judgment. And it says, the sword of Yahweh is filled with blood. It is made fat with fatness, and with the blood of the lambs and goats, and with the fat of the kidneys of rams. For Yahweh hath a sacrifice in Basra. And what is modern day Basra today? America. Because ultimately America is the top power structure of Esau Edom's rulership. All right, along with the beast system that makes up this power structure, which ultimately involves NATO and the EU. And America sits on top of that. It says, in a great slaughter in the land of Idumea. So there you have it. It's talking about the missiles. Okay. So back here, Revelation chapter 9, verse 19, it says, for their power is in their mouth and in their tails. And for their tails were like unto serpents and had heads, and with them they do hurt. And once again, that's speaking about the missile. The tails represents when the missiles are shot off, going back to the picture. All right. As you can see there, fire shoots off from the tail ends. That's what gives them their power to shoot forth through the air. Right. Back here, Revelation 9 and 20, it says, and the rest. All right. Salakia. Drinking water. Right. Now it says here, and the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues. Now, why does John a Revelator writing calling these plagues? Because remember, you ultimately not every Edomite is going to be totally destroyed, because those top banking elites, they're going to go into bunkers. And this is the ultimate plague that's going to plague them. Speaking of Esau, Edom, when you get Zechariah the 14th chapter, going into that plague. But it says, by these plagues yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone and of wood, which neither can see nor hear nor walk. Neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, which when you go into that word sorcery, it goes back to the Greek word pharmakia, okay, which is what you get witchcraft from their potions of their medical or medicinal practices. It says, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. And let's get a precept, if we can, to close out in the Apocrypha. Let's get 2nd Esdras, chapter 16, right around, I'm going to start at verse 18, but the point is at verse 20. The beginning of sorrows and great mournings, the beginning of famine and great death, the beginning of wars, and the power shall stand in fear, the beginning of evils. What shall I do when these evils shall come? Behold, famine, plague, tribulation, anguish are set as scourges for amendment. But for all these things they shall not turn from their wickedness, nor be always mindful of scourges. Okay, so that goes right in with them not repenting. All right. And so that pretty much concludes the breakdown to Revelation, the 9th chapter. And I sincerely hope that it was edifying. So with that, all praise to Yahweh Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. And until next time, Shalom.